Awesome. Well, good morning and welcome to Bringing the Outside In, Engaging Communities in Priority Setting and Planning. My name is Madeline Morgan and I'm with the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network, and I'm joined today by Sandy McKinley of Sector Wind and Kelton Artuso and Phyllis of Philanthropy Massachusetts. This is the first workshop of 2021 offered by the Massachusetts Community Foundation Partnership. As you may know, the partnership is made up of 14 Massachusetts-based community foundations who have come together since the start of the coronavirus pandemic to pool resources to strengthen the nonprofit community. Both Philanthropy Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Nonprofit Network are pleased to work with the foundations to bring these resources to the Massachusetts nonprofit community. We're thrilled to be joined today by Sandy McKinley of Sector Wind. Over the past month, Sector Wind has been working with nonprofits on adapting strategies during these uncertain times. Before we get into this morning's session, I just want to go over some logistical elements. We ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation. I'd also encourage you to select active speaker view at the top of your screen so that the active speaker will appear more prominently on your screen. And if you have any questions during any part of the presentation, please feel free to submit them in the chat box to everyone or directly to me at Madeline Morgan, MNN. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat box at any time, and we are making a recording of this webinar and we'll distribute it afterwards. Before I hand it over to Sandy, I just want to mention the rest of the exciting sessions coming up in this month alone in January. So on January 26th, we have the Fundamentals of Nonprofit Finance, or the Financial Bootcamp. On January 27th, we have Organizational Change to Achieve Equity. And on January 28th, we have Alternative Strategies for Fundraising Events and Designing the Event. Additional programs are being held through April and can be viewed and registered for at bit.ly/MASSCFP. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to Sandy.
Thanks, Madeline, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. We're gonna move pretty rapidly through our time together today, with hopes that we have time at the end for questions. And as Madeline said, we're going to ask you to put questions into the chat box, and I will take those at the end. But to start off, let's see. Excuse me. Of course. So we have three goals for today. The first is really to understand how our constituents and communities can really give us quality input that is useful for our decision-making, prioritization, and planning. So really, like, why do we want to do this? The second goal today is to lift up some of our best practices and try to avoid those pitfalls that can happen when we reach out to our constituents and communities. And then third is really to provide some practical tools and tips of ways to incorporate the feedback data into our decision-making and planning. So those are the three things that we're going to try to do in the next 90 minutes or so. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is really talk about language. And this is one of the questions that came in on registration, is really, what do we mean by constituent? What do we mean by community? And I'm going to use both of these and hopefully not get too tongue-tied when I do. But when we talk about constituent, it's a person, it's the individual who has an interest and relationship to your organization. So that can be a client, a patient, an audience member, somebody on your board, a volunteer, a partner, a next door neighbor, right? So it's that person who has an interest and some type of relationship to your organization. Community is, it's a really it's an interesting word. There's no and it's also a word that especially in the social sector, there's a lot caught up in it. The definition that I use is, a group or groups of people that you serve or wherein you reside, because there's something about place in community frequently. That care about and for each other, right? So the community is about a group of people that care for each other and feel as if they belong together. And so it's self-defined by that group of people. And so it's it can be client groups, it could be patient groups, community groups, other organizations, audiences, staff. Can feel a sense of community, board volunteers, partners, neighbors, neighborhoods, but also then funder groups, right? So we will use constituent and community together because they are different things. And then also recognizing there are, especially in black communities, that the community has even a more derived more in-depth meaning. But for today, and because it was asked explicitly in the registration, these are how we are defining these two terms. So kind of why do we involve our constituents and communities? So starting with a little bit of, hopefully not dating myself, but also a little bit of humor and drawing from our for-profit brothers and sisters. I went back into the little bit of the Wayback Machine and thought about, well, where are some examples of where perhaps examples of where people did not necessarily take into account the aspirations or opinions of community. And it's fun to pick on consumer products sometimes, but Colgate lasagna, Cheeto lip balm, purple ketchup, perfume from Bic lighters, and then of course the old one of New Coke. So thinking about consumer products and some of the missteps are kind of easy targets, but in our sector, in the social sector, our stakes are typically higher. We are people serving people and providing essential services, caring for the sick, serving the young, or we are nurturing vibrancy through arts and culture. We are beholden to the public good. So we don't become necessarily the butt of the joke, or we lose profit, but we are really working to serve people. So thinking about how we involve our constituents and communities is essential to helping us make those decisions. We don't want to end up being the purple ketchup of our sector. And ultimately, our guiding aspiration, or at least my guiding aspiration in the work that I do for organizations, is two things. One, financial health. I'm a finance and strategy consultant. That's what I spent my career doing. And financial health is really having the types and amounts of money to cover the full cost of operations, and so that you're able to cover risk and pursue opportunity, but also strategic resilience, which is the ability to anticipate and adapt to the fluidity of our environment. And I think we've seen that in the past 12 months, while maintaining focus on mission and your long-term horizon. And so these two things together, being able to have the ability to anticipate and adapt, requires input. We can't anticipate and adapt if we're just responding to our own notion of what is what is happening around us. The needs of our constituents, the needs of our communities are changing, and we have to be able to really understand that, so that we are able to allocate our resources, financial and otherwise, to align with those priorities. So sometimes I get the question of, gosh, you're a financial consultant, why are we doing outreach to our constituents and communities when we're thinking about financial planning? Well, this is the reason, because we want to make sure that our assumptions around what are our programmatic priorities are correct, and that we are using our resources in a way that is aligned and smart. So if we're thinking about financial strength and strategic resilience, what goes into that, right? Because we can think about like cutting our organization or looking at an organization through so many different lenses. I like to think of it with like 5 different buckets. The first is like, what we all think about in our organizations. It's the work that we do. It's our programs and services. It's what we do and how we do it. It's our true north. And so, that's what we get. We kind of get up in the morning, that's what we do. The second, it builds from that, right? Who does the work? It's our people, right? it's our people, those who do the work, our staff, our board, and volunteers, but it's also the way it's done. So it's our people and our culture. The third thing, because none of us is an island, right? Nor our organization. The third thing that goes into supporting our mission is our relationships, right? Who are those external people and groups and organizations that support us and help us to advance our mission? The fourth thing is the one that folks think of is sometimes really boring, but I find fascinating. It's really those systems and operations, the technology and the processes and that infrastructure, our buildings, our facilities, our equipment that allow us to do the work that we do. And then finally, and I put this last for a reason, is the money and finance, the types and amounts of money that support us to do all of those things. So those 5 things are what I see as the elements of our that support our mission, the elements of our strength and resilience. So it's not just about money. It's about, what is our strength of programs, the strength of our people and our culture, the strength of our relationships, our operations, and then our financial health and strength. And so each organization has a different profile of strength. And so understanding, our constituent opinions, our community opinions and perceptions in these different areas is helpful as we're thinking of planning and changing. So the next question for me is always, all right, well, so when do we do this? Do we reach out to the community like just when we're doing strategic planning? Do we think about it, when there's a crisis? Well, I think about it when, with my clients, at moments of change, when we're thinking about expanding or contracting, eliminating, if there's a change in schedule. So that's a great place to get input, a great time to get input. There's also the moments of opportunity, like, should we do this, right? It's a new way, a new program. Are we changing a way of delivering something? A change in leadership, a new venue, changing a facility. Those are moments of opportunity. Those are times when it might be helpful for us to get some perspective. And then moments of uncertainty. Those inflection points. Issues around like major staffing transitions. If there's a programmatic or a funding hiccup or change, or really at that beginning of a planning process. But ultimately, I think if we reflect on our own organizations, at any one point in time, we are facing a moment of change or opportunity of uncertainty. So I like to say, kind of with regularity, when are we checking in with our constituencies and with our communities? So. As we're thinking about priority setting and planning, we've now thought about financial health and strategic resilience. We've thought about the things that prop up our 5 strengths. But like, really, what helps us as an organization guide our priority setting and planning, right? And it's really 2 things, right? We're always thinking about mission, right? That's why we get up in the morning. That's why we do the work that we do. So that's always the screen that we're looking through. And the other is, what do we do that's most valued by our constituents in the community, right? So like, what is it that we do? And what do people not just want, but what do they value? So it's these 2 factors that are constantly, I believe, either consciously or subconsciously, we're going back and forth in our mind. So what are we founded to do? The next question is the mission still relevant? Is it relevant in the same way that it was in the past, right? So I think that we all know that we're constantly revisiting that and thinking about how we express that. So express our mission or live out that mission. And second is that value. What do our constituents and community value? What do they need and what do they want? And the second part is, how do we know? And that's what we're talking about today. How do we know? And then the third is really thinking about, how pushing ourselves to, or inviting ourselves to bring our constituents and community into the decision-making process now and going forward. We're not going to talk too deeply about co-creating with the community. I think that's not just a 90-minute webinar. I think that's a little bit more like advanced course. But know that that is something where that is out there. If you haven't heard of that already, it's like of community-centered or co-creating and co-planning with communities. It's really very powerful when you see it done well. But thinking about how can we invite constituents and community into the decision-making process now and going forward. And we'll touch on that, but for today, we're looking for input that can help us guide our priority setting and planning. And then also some of the work that I do, there's an important distinction between gathering community and constituent input and evaluation. So one caution or one pitfall that we want to make sure that we avoid is not confusing the two. Evaluation is looking at the effectiveness of our programs or our organization and its intent. Are we based on the intent in how, which is our kind of predetermined or predefined set of criteria, are we meeting expectations based on a predefined set of criteria. Evaluation is measurable, it's during a specific period of time, right? So it's really measuring effectiveness, it's set on metrics, and it's over a specific period of time. Community or constituent input, it's looking at value to community or constituents. It's asking us to think about, to reflect on or solicit what is the need or not, right? What is our position in a community or among constituents? What is the context? What is the contextualizing of where we are in our sector or our community? What is our reputation? What type of support do we have? It can get to quality of service, right? It can get to, sometimes it can get to satisfaction, right? Not always, and frequently it can get to potential opportunity. When I have done this, many of my clients have been very surprised that a lot of the feedback that has come back, come back from constituents has lifted up opportunity for the organization. And I find that, I actually think that that's a wonderful way for organizations to explore growth or opportunity, is for it to bubble up from constituents and community. But recognizing that there is this difference between evaluation and input. However, I love the people and I love the equitable evaluation, or the trend for equitable evaluation. If you haven't heard of equitable evaluation, grant makers for GEO, Grant for Effective Organizations, has a wonderful initiative around what it means to be more equitable in evaluations. It's more for kind of the philanthropic field at this point, but the principles are fantastic. But thinking about how does evaluation be less compliant driven and more community driven? Thinking about how does the community decide, how do communities and constituents decide what is really relevant to be measured? And there's a number of principles that I feel that we can borrow from that shift in kind of like evaluation protocols that can inform what we do here. The first is really being absolutely explicit and transparent in information that you are gathering and why. And I think that goes without saying. And that means being, oh, what you're gathering, how it will be used, where it will be stored, and how it will be disseminated. Um, for example, when I am doing interviews on behalf of my clients, I'm telling my one-on-one interviewees that I am taking notes by hand on paper. I will type those into a Excel document that I will share, it will be on my hard drive, and I will share via email with my client. That is, I will be, that is the level of detail that I will be giving to my interviewee, those who I will be interviewing. Respecting confidentiality or anonymity, and the and not attributing anything if that is if somebody asks for it, or if that's the condition of your interview. To the extent that you can, and I encourage it always, to share back the data with the constituency or the community, especially if it's around a program that will be impacting that constituency or community, and saying, this is what we learned from your participation. Being very mindful of what we call a kind of extractive practices, right? This notion of we're going to extract information from you can be feel very exploitative, right? And so feel very kind of unnecessarily people are being used. If possible, using the constituents or the community in developing kind of the interview script and interview protocol. So making sure that the tone and the tenor and the questions are like resonate. And if possible, employ the and use constituents or community members to facilitate in the data gathering and facilitation of either interviews or small group exercises, or even survey gathering, to the extent that this is not just about us or the organization coming into and dropping in and gathering information. How can we engage with our constituents and communities so that there is shared ownership of both the process and ownership of the information that comes from it. So with that, just a sip of water, and I'll get started with how do we dive in here. So one of the first things that we want to think about is, how do we not get the usual suspects? Let's see. All right, there we go. So how do we not get our usual suspects? I think for me, when I do this work, this is the hardest, or one of the, I'll say hard, it's something that we work through a lot. I think we are all short on time, and there is, we feel most comfortable asking people who we know to do something. And so the tendency is to, go to those that are comfortable for us, to say, hey, listen, can you sit down with so-and-so for an hour and talk about this program? So it takes some time to build a list, and to build a list that gives us a fair selection. The first thing, and I think the one that works really well for in most cases, is kind of a nomination process. and asking people to nominate who they think would be good participants, and nominate people who are familiar with the issues, and also just be respectful in sharing their opinions. And uh, uh, when you are asking people for nominations, I certainly ask leadership of the organization. I also ask staff of the organization, frontline staff of the organization. I'll ask funders. I will say, um, I will ask, community leaders. I will certainly share those lists with executives and boards, but then we will come up with a fairly representative list, and then come up with a contact strategy and an invitation strategy. Um, there's another technique is really, a random selection, and ask sometimes community leaders, can we invite, can we send out invitations or call for invitations to a group who might be interested in speaking with us? And then the invitation goes out to a a faith community, and then and 3 or 4 people from that community volunteer, and they are brought into a small group. Sometimes, depending on your organization, it could be all members of the same group, right? So it could be that it's all people who are um, uh, it could, I don't know, all veterans, right? In a particular group. It could be a similar same thing, like a same position or title. This is great when working with staff. If you have a staff of a large enough size, or you have a particular program, parents of preschool students, patients receiving a particular service. And then finally, the last thing is, the self-identified. This is the, bulletin board, like notice on the bulletin board, or, the virtual bulletin board. We're looking for volunteers to take this survey, or the community bulletin board. And those are just, that is a, use that selection criteria when you're really like looking to gather as broad of a sample as possible. If you're looking at a community-wide survey, and you know that there is large community participation, for example, in a school district listserv or a town-wide online bulletin board, or I'm thinking of the virtual examples, the supermarket bulletin board, whatever it might be. Those are typical techniques of just gathering names. The second part of this is then just curating what comes in and why. There's going to be in all honesty, there's going to be pressure frequently from board members, from executive staff, from staff to ask, well, why are we talking to so-and-so? They had a bad experience. Well, I love to talk to so-and-so who had a bad experience. That would really be very helpful to me. It's not saying that we've done anything wrong, but people who have a bad experience can also be very helpful in helping us think through where we could be, where we might need to make some investment. And that could be helpful for us in the future. They could make positive positive reflections to help us with planning and prioritization. So moving forward. So in addition to after thinking about our, getting our pool, the next thing we have to think about the next 2 things we have to think about are what depth of engagement, what's the depth of engagement? How deep do we want to go? And second, our topics of inquiry. What do we want to ask? So the depth of engagement is interesting because, like I said, we kind of have, and I think it makes natural sense to us. There's a spectrum of participation. right? And it follows a continuum of just general communication, right? We can communicate to people, we can ask for feedback, right? We can ask for input, we can co-design, we can have community-led design. What this means for us, you know, and this is a pretty well-known rubric that's based on the IAP, the International Association of Public Participation. It's a global organization um, that you know that thinks about like what are our goals and what is the relationship exchange between what we are what we are intending to do and what does that mean for the relationship. So the if we're thinking about informing, right, this is our press release, right? We want to disseminate our information in a timely manner. And the exchange is, hey, listen, we want to keep you informed. It's not necessarily very helpful for receiving feedback or informing planning, right? But it's just disseminating information in a timely manner. It's important because if we fall down on just basic communication, we tend to, we might risk just, we risk the criticism of not keeping people informed and people feeling shut out. And so information and basic communication is critically important, but it's not necessarily as helpful for us in planning. Consulting is where we ask people for feedback on issues, on typically previous, already decided things, right? So, hey, listen, here's our strategic plan. We'd like your feedback on it. It's not saying that you have any decision or input rights into it, but we'll take your comments on it. We want to hear what you think. We want to get your gut reaction on it. Maybe in version 2, we might take your opinion on it, but we're sharing information with you, and we're willing to hear your reaction, your comments on it. And it could be somewhat helpful in planning, and but again, it doesn't necessarily build that two-way communication or that two-way relationship with our constituents and communities. Involving is where we start to get into that, and that's where typically we are typically where we're going to spend like the majority of our time, or where we're going to focus in today's presentation. This is where we solicit the aspirations and concerns of our constituents and communities, and we really take those into consideration prior to our planning or our prioritization. And that's really saying we're going to take your feedback into our decision making, right? We're going to solicit it before, and we're going to take that into our decision making. So that's really involving. If we can, I would encourage us to say, to move to one further and say, how can we involve our constituents and communities in that in the decision making as partners, where they have a voice in that decision making team, right? Are they equal partners? Do they have an actual role on that decision making team? And there are a number of ways that we can do that. But and it moves just beyond input. There is decision rights. There are decision rights there, but they are in partnership with us as in leadership of the organization. On the far right, what I've called in trust. This is where the community and constituents hold the decision-making power, and we in the organization are entrusted with implementation, right? So the design is held within the community, and we at the organization level are the ones who implement. So the community decides, we implement, right? So that's community-centered design. And that is amazing when it happens, and there's so much movement in the sector as a whole for community-centered design. And again, what I said, that beyond just a 90-minute webinar with me today. So today we will really look at this, talk about involving in that partnership, that meaty middle. So as we're thinking about the depth, right? The second thing we have to think about is, all right, our lines of inquiry. And we can go so far. We can think about, we want to ask we can come up with hundreds of questions to ask people. And I'm going to advise against hundreds of questions. But if I think about, you know, our broad topics, how do we break these topics down? Um, to, questions, excuse me, can fall into really three areas three areas. First is we can ask questions around what are our strengths and our value, right? So we understand what do we do well and what do you value about us? The second area is what do we need? Like what do we need, right? And what do we need right now? And then where are there opportunities for us to grow? And the third are, if we are to change in any way, what needs to happen, right? So it's like needs and opportunity, the difference between needs and opportunity and conditions for change. Needs and opportunities are, we are we are continuing to do what we do now. We need to do it better. Conditions for change are saying we are transforming in some way. What needs to happen? So one conditions for change is much more, in a way, much more aspirational or more forward in the future, much more forward in the future. And needs and opportunities are more organic or today. So that's where so kind of these broad topics, strengths and values, needs and opportunities, and then what are our kind of, in a way, longer term conditions or conditions for change. And we'll dig into these a little bit more deeply. So if we start there, then we say, okay, we'll go back to our strengths wheel, and we use those three topics, and we say, how can we use our programs and services, people and culture, community and systems and operations to refine our lines of inquiry, right? So with programs and services, we can think about, do our programs meet a current need, right? So that is looking at looking at value. Are they valued? If so, what's most valued? Are we focused and aligned with our current needs? And then finally, like what is needed in order to, and then fill in the blank there. Our people and culture, right? What are our teams and inherent strengths? What are our constituents' perspectives? How do they perceive our team? Are the perceptions or the experience of our teams aligned with our aspirations around, how in our around equity, around our commitments to our people? Is it around inclusion and our culture? Community is interesting because it allows us, if we think about, it allows us to raise up issues around, do we have advocates? Who are they? And what can we expect? Like, what can we expect from this relationship? Where also do we find, where do we find opposition in what we are doing? And where is there, in a way, competition or threats to what we are doing? Are we still timely in the work that we are doing? And where is our organization in context to both our sector and our geography and our community? And then going to systems and operations, and frequently I'll get pushback on this, but it also in interviews and then in small groups, we find out what are the limits of our operational infrastructure. Is it supporting our program? Are we starting to see like the operations get stressed? What is the experience of our constituents and our clients? And is that something that is, are we seeing that struggle? And then finance and money. This one is a little tougher because it's frequently invisible to our community and our constituents. Although we sometimes, if we're interviewing our funders, we get more information here. But do we demonstrate that trustworthiness and an ability to manage our financial resources? Where it also comes up is, are there obvious deficits or deficiencies that especially if we are facing a budget shortfall, are things falling through the cracks, and is that being noticed by our clients or constituents? So those are like areas of how feedback can inform our planning, because it helps me, it helps executive directors as we're going into to either strategic planning or budgeting or strategic financial planning, to say like, oh gosh, our constituents, our community is giving us this feedback about our programs not meeting a current need, or our programs meeting a current need, and we don't have the infrastructure or capacity to expand. And how does that now become a priority for us as we're looking to next year or the year after? So just to recap this, we're thinking of level of engagement and deciding upon the type of input or participation that you want, and then confirming what you'd like to learn. And this is kind of this iterative process, this back and forth, this rocking back and forth. What do we want to learn, and who and what level of depth do we want to engage in? It's also, and we'll talk about this a little bit in more detail when we think about the types of engagement and what we can actually do. It does matter also on organizational capacity, if you're doing it internally, if you're using a third party, and if you have the budget to do what you want to do. The budget, if there's budget of time and people in place, so that you do have your own, everybody has their own constraints, and also timeline, right? How quickly do you want to get this done? So thinking through, okay, well, we're thinking about what we want to learn. We know what our level of engagement is. We're thinking about a list of people. What formats do we want to use? There's really only 3 major formats, right? We have one-on-one interviews, right? We have like a one-on-one exchange. We have small groups, sometimes called focus groups. And then we kind of have the survey, right? We have the person reflecting on their own. And I'll just walk through these briefly. I'm also going to give you, refer you to external. There's tons of resources out there on all 3 of these. So I'm giving you some resources externally. I'm also going to share some of my favorite, easy to learn tools and techniques that you can hopefully take away from today. So interviews are great for information gathering, right? They're depending on, interviews are great for a lot of things, but I like them for information gathering. They're also great for connecting with constituents whom you may not have had the opportunity to talk with in the past, it's or constituents who may not have had an opportunity to speak directly to the organization. The goal here is to foster this atmosphere of trust, or at least free expression. I won't say trust, I want to say candor. We want to, and we can talk about what we can do to foster that. But interviews are, if we get the right people in the room, we get the right people to come and speak with us or speak with us virtually, that is, they are a fantastic tool for us to use. A lot of people say, well, what do I ask, right? First thing we want to do is build an interview guide, right? It's 10 to 12 questions. You're going to ask those to all interviewees, or at least get to those questions. It's not a forced march through your 10 to 12 questions. Start with your broad categories, your strengths and values, your needs and opportunities, your conditions for change. Refine those based on your priorities. I allow 45 to 60 minutes for an interview, and then I give myself 30 to 60 minutes to capture my notes afterwards, to type those up. Um, I've put some just sample questions that I've pulled from various interviews that I've done over to the side for your reference. You'll get everybody will send out the slides a little bit later. But the resource that I've put down at the bottom, which is a link, is to IDEO. They're the people who do design thinking. They have a catalog of about 160 what's called method cards. And that's a really fantastic resource for generating ideas around questions for different types of constituents and communities, depending on the situation. I use them myself, and I don't know, there are 60 or so people, or however many people who have been registered, but I don't know each of your situations, so I can't say always ask these questions. So I'm providing you that resource. A couple of questions that I do always like is, one is what do we do that interferes with the success of our overall efforts, right? Is there something that we do that is that always gets in our way? Can you just elaborate on that? Because it's really inviting people to talk about what we do that could, that we're unintentionally getting in our own way. I enjoy when I'm doing interviews, especially with people who know the organization, to invite them to tell a story, reflect on a high point experience, a story, because one, it helps us capture a positive story about us. And then after that, then to ask them about either what makes our organization unique, or to describe a value, right? So it's staying neutral, but it's asking for reflecting on a positive experience. But we want to make sure that we are balancing that with a question that invites for some critical reflection. And then, I will also always ask, thinking about, where, even if it's not related to necessarily our core mission, where, what is the need that is seen in our community, our neighborhood, our sector, our street, our block, just to see if the current of what the organization is seeing as a priority, because I will ask this also of staff and leadership, is what constituents and community is seeing, if those two things are aligned. And it's really interesting to pair those things up. So I invite you, there are hundreds of questions out there, but really thinking about, I try to distribute questions relatively equally between strengths and values, needs and opportunities, and kind of conditions for change. An interview technique that I love, especially when I'm interviewing people who I almost say are reluctant interviewers, but people who might not have the experience of providing constructive feedback, is the I like, I wish, and the what if technique. And I think this is good for like just a life skill. So and it is just saying, it's helping, it's reframing questions using the prompting words I like, or I wish, or what if. So the sample question I've used at top was, how would you, or are you able to describe Townville's relationships with students, donors, partners, neighbors, and communities? Usually I would choose one. And reframing that, if somebody would just give me a kind of a blank stare, I would say, what do you like about Townville's relationships with its students? Or the next question I might ask would be like, well, what do you wish for Townville to do more of or less of with its students? Or the next question would be, what if, or finish this sentence for me, what if Townville worked with its students in finish the sentence. What if Townville worked with the students, dot, dot, dot. It's a way of like digging in deeper in those with interview questions. And I find that especially in these types of interviews, of information gathering interviews that help us imagine and plan, this is an interview technique that I come back to time after time after time after time. So other interview tips, and I think this is like pretty common sense. Don't judge, be genuinely curious, just and really listen, like be that active listener. Do have interview guides. They're not scripts. You're going to want to, make sure that you get to all of the questions, but use your judgment. Customized based on subgroups. You saw in that last question, I had, students, donors, etc. Don't ask the donor the student question. Don't ask the student the donor question. And the number of interviews depends on the issue. My general rule of thumb is that I feel like a good sample is 6 to 8 per issue. An issue is broadly defined. So if I'm interviewing a group of artists about an art center, I want to make sure that if an art center is looking to change programming, and I'm interviewing artists, donors, and patrons, artists, donors, and audience members or visitors, I'm probably going to do 6 to 8 of each, right? I probably get a nice set. If I'm going to do interviews, I'm probably going to do 6 to 8 of each. That seems to be a good size. But if I have a lot of different subgroups or it's too prohibitive, I might only do 3 of each. And it's thinking about what is the right method. I might start with survey and then go to a small group and then interview. I might do a descending pyramid, a larger survey, a couple of small groups, and then just a 2 or 3 or 4 one-on-one interviews from there. Speaking of small groups, I love small group interviews. I love them because they're more dynamic and they can stimulate thoughts and work off of each other. And a lot of things come out of those small groups that might not otherwise have occurred. Oh, yes, that's right. Oh, no, I thought of that. Oh, remember when? And what about this, right? So small groups aren't therapy sessions. They're not for organizations, like not there to kind of teach small groups anything. They're also not, they're also not the Department of Complaints, right? So there is an interview guide. Small groups are great when we're really considering, especially something new. Does this really, what do you think, or what would be? Their small groups are great for probing deeper on a survey or asking questions that aren't great for a survey. And also, small groups are great before making any major moves, right? Before moving to implementation. And I'll talk about the practicalities of small groups in a moment. But there's, you really can't go wrong with small groups or focus groups. The dynamics of small groups now in COVID and virtual is a little different than in person, but they can be done and they can be really effective. But there's some things to be mindful of. There's kind of, you do need a few things, right? You need a facilitator. What I'll say about a facilitator is that if you're going to do this internally, don't always feel that it has to be the most senior person doing the facilitation, or the program person. I have seen, and I regularly advocate for mid-level staff and junior staff to use this as a professional development opportunity, because I feel that one, it is it's a skill that people should have, and it can be learned relatively easily, as a facilitator, and helping people, in this small group environment. And two, it's taking that power dynamic or that perception of power out of the small group actually helps to foster more conversation. So that's my advice on, if you're going to do this internally, don't feel that it has to be um, the senior staff member or the frontline program director. Um, I could give somebody else on the staff an opportunity, as a professional development opportunity. Because I've seen it be much more effective and powerful. There should be a recorder or a note taker in the room who can sit kind of in the corner, so that allows the facilitator to be fully present. And then participants. Typically in the room, if you're in the room, it's 8 to 12, but nobody's in the room anymore. So virtually it's 6, I think, is the right number of people, because it gives us the time to see everybody's face, and everyone's face is big enough on the screen. I tend to over invite by 10 to 20%. And making sure that we just have a good list. I know some people know their constituencies a little bit better and over invite by more. And I keep the number to, I keep it to 8 to 12 questions is our goal there. There's a lot of questions around compensation. I would say, like, it depends. I'd say use your judgment on this. There's people who are like very anti-compensation. I am, if you're, I am a firm believer, if you are taking somebody out of their day to day, and this is not something that they are necessarily doing as part of a volunteer, they're a volunteer board member, and this is not part of their, and you're diverting them from their work, that we are asking them to do something outside of their realm, that we should pay them, and just a fair compensation for their time. So I think use your judgment, reflect on the values of your organization, and think about what that compensation is. I would invite you to pay, if you do compensate in cash. The gift card to Starbucks is, I'd say that's just compensate in cash if you do compensate. But that's my thought on compensation. I am a pro compensation person. But I know that there are others out there who feel that compensation dilutes the answers, or dilutes the purity of the data. But I believe we are asking people, especially our constituents and our community members, to spend time with us, that we should compensate them. There is an excellent guide for running focus groups, and it's been around for a long time. It's free. I have the link here. It's called Focus Group Interviewing. It is for profit and nonprofits, but it is excellent. It tells you everything from how to set up the time, and I could not do a better job than this resource that is out there, in telling you all of the intricate and mechanics of focus groups, of interviewing. The same rubric applies of questions, right? You're going to ask some of the same questions, perhaps, but in a little different way, because you are in the group setting, and you might be using the similar technique in asking the questions, but what you're going to do is record it a little differently, which I'll talk about in a moment. All right. One thing that I will share is some common barriers to participation. And this was on a chat board of consultants. One was, and I think they all kind of make sense, but like just going through it as we're thinking of the invitations. One is a kind of making sure that people have a clear understanding of the intent of the exercise and what it's being used for. Recognizing that people may have had a bad experience in the past, or that there's a pattern of decisions being made without people like not reflecting community input, right? So then just people just not having good experiences with other people asking them for their input, and organizations or governments not following through. There's economic barriers, not needing to focus on like work or school or like taking care of their family. Issues around culture, religion, or identity not being reflected, or that there are spiritual or religious beliefs that prevent participation. Issues of transportation or childcare, fear of being judged, unsafe, unwelcome, and fear around immigration status. And then like issues just around pure conflict, like logistical conflict. I just put those up there because I do that mental checklist with myself when I'm doing the small groups, and making sure that, like, what can I do to help mitigate some of these things, and also recognizing too that I recognize that I am a white middle-aged woman, that I might not be the right person to run some small group interviews. And so also recognizing the skin that you are in, and that sometimes I'm the right person, sometimes I'm not. And just being honest and reflecting with the groups that you're working with. So when I'm working with small groups, I love this because it's quick, and you can take a piece of legal paper and fold it in fours. I don't add the graphics, but I wanted to jazz it up a little bit here. One way, and you can do this, it's a rapid note-taking way of for someone. You can write the questions on top, or you can write it by subject, but it's really looking at 4 things: what the group likes and loves, what are some of the critiques, what are their questions, and what are their ideas, right? It covers all of the bases. And it's easy for a note taker to kind of capture those 4 things. And you can, depending on how you set up your questions, or you do it by topic area, you can have that note taker can have it on his or her table or their table, and and um, and just quickly jot down. It makes like compiling notes much easier moving forward. So. But it's quick. You can use it in other settings too. I do it. I've used it in other settings as well. But for this type of small group work, I find it very. I find it the easiest way to take notes. So finally, surveys. So the surveys that we take for feedback and planning, there's if you look up surveys or have ever studied surveys, there's either, depending on who you ask, there's 3, 6, or 7 different types of surveys. But we all agree that this type of survey is called an exploratory type of survey. It's really seeking to understand an issue or identify a problem rather than try to quantify an issue or gather statistics, right? And these types of surveys are great for understanding concerns, priorities, perceptions. Surveys are less personal, right? They just are, right? It's a person and a piece of paper. And there are pros and cons to that, right? And so the pro may be, like, some people love surveys, right? Sometimes the introverts love surveys, and like you want to make sure you have enough characters, enough space there so that they can write all of their comments, right? You might solicit a more candid response, especially if it's anonymous. Another pro is that it's relatively inexpensive, and there's a huge potential to reach more people, right? If you have a positive response rate. The con is that you might have people who are like, let me just get this survey over with, and you get really short and sweet answers. You have less control over who responds, and the response rate is unpredictable, right? It could be feast or famine. One thing that, I've seen work is if you have a facility, when we all come back to facilities, or you are in, or you're able to be in a physical location, or be able to market or provide some sort of promotion at a physical place. The town I live in did this at the library book return, which is outside in the pandemic. Able um, to like have a point of service or point of gather reminder for survey taking. There's also incentives. Can you offer incentives for survey taking? There was I recently saw a survey where everybody who took the survey got the tote bag, right? So there are those, and this was for a relatively discreet, but they wanted a high percentage of their users to respond, and so that was something that they were able to offer. And I followed up with them, and they had upwards of 70% of their users respond because of the tote bag. That was important for them. So that was an investment that they made. So that for them, that was not inexpensive. That was a $8 cost per response, but it was important for them to be able to get that information. And then surveys, again, I keep to the kind of 12 question rule if possible. We want to make sure that people aren't tired and abandoned. We want people to continue the arc of the survey, and it can serve as it provides it provides good information. None of these tools, the one-on-one, the small groups, or the surveys, have to be used exclusively. And as I mentioned before, they can be built upon each other. You can start with a survey, you can move to small group, you can ask at the end of the survey, would you mind being contacted in order to participate in a small group? Would you mind being contacted to participate in a one-on-one interview? You can compound them on top, you can build on top of them. But really kind of seeking that input. So finally, what do we do at the end, right? We want to compile and share the data. This is frequently the hard part, and I think frequently why some people hire consultants. And I'll just briefly share about like what I do with this. I tried to put this into a format that would be usable, but the way I do it is, which is a much more kind of there's the raw data in the notes, but then there is also kind of summary data. I will look at, depending on, and this is just a sample, I will look at survey responses, typically based on what we're asking. So for this example, I used a program, right? We're looking about a program, a key program at an organization. And again, a very abbreviated just for our conversation today. And you'll see along the left-hand side, it's really kind of our, like 4 of our key components are our strengths of nonprofits: programs and services, people and culture, community systems and operations. I didn't put finance here because it wasn't necessarily relevant. And then, summarizing some of the responses to the questions under strengths and values, needs and opportunities, and conditions for change. So for example, under programs and services, some of the strengths and values reflections were, our respondents said that the core program is helpful and the transition to virtual was rough at first, but maintained its essence. And the big value that came out from that data was that we're not preachy. The organization isn't preachy. Okay, so that, and there could be a lot more behind that, but that's kind of the summary that we got out of it. The needs and opportunities that were identified in that were, in 2018, an organization that provided similar services closed, and many faith-based organizations have been stepping in to fill the gap, right? So that was really interesting that came out as in kind of the needs and opportunities around like the programming in the community. And then the conditions for change. I didn't fill this out fully, but to say of those who said the program wasn't that helpful, we had some detractors, some critics in there. Here were the issues that they said would need to change in order for it to become more helpful, right? Because if we look at the strengths and values, only 60% of them people said that the program was really helpful. There's 40% of people who said were either on the fence or who weren't, or who said it wasn't helpful. And here's what they said. But interestingly, when we look at people and culture, nearly everybody said that like the people were the best part about this program, and they appreciated the staff. And people raised up that having, now that there is new bilingual staff at the desk, that's even better. The needs and opportunity that they raised, which was actually something that I drew exactly from one of my client respondents, was that the front desk area is rushed and that they like to stay longer or talk on the way out because it gets too busy. So this is a people serving people organization, and that that is very much seen as a community, a hub, and that they feel that the way that the space is laid out, that they feel rushed when they leave, and that's not an environment that the organization wanted to foster, and that was important to them. But the community was really was interesting. Again, pulling actually from some real data that I had. The center was understood to be a trusted organization, but only to those who knew about it, and so that was okay. And the needs and opportunity, when we talked with community leaders, half of the community leaders that we spoke to didn't really know about the organization, but they knew that their constituents, or the people that they served, knew about the organization. So they knew about it through like a derivative. They knew about it by reputation. So that was an opportunity for us. And finally, the conditions for change. One thing that was raised was that the center was closed on the weekends, and that was seen as not really being able to fully participate in the life and rhythm of the neighborhood. And then systems and operations. A couple of things, like the positives were that the facility was clean and it felt safe. A lot of people felt that, a fair enough of people felt that it was hard to find. And then that conditions for change, again, going back to the front desk issue, so people suggested that there was a blank area on the east side where people should be able to gather on their way out. So by this brief example, and I did want to leave time for questions, this is the way that I, and again, in a much more in-depth way, begin to raise up the answers or the responses and the data that I get from those one-on-one interviews, those small group interviews, and those surveys. But again, put that into a format that can start to tell us, well, gosh, you know what? Our programs, our services seem to be, are valued by a majority of our participants. But there are some that feel that there can be, there are things that we need to change, that there's opportunities within the community for us to be better known. Also there's need in the community because there's an unmet need because of a closure in 2018. And that, and we can go on, and you can see that we now had new data to help inform our priorities and planning in 2020, in 2021. So with that, I'm right at 11:45, and I do see that there are some questions. So with that, all right, so I'm looking to see. Let's see. Any questions? I see that people are just reflecting about the slides. Yes, slides will be made available, but I don't know if Madeline or anyone else has received questions.
I have not received any questions yet. So if anyone has any questions about today's presentation, please feel free to message them to everyone or directly to me, and I can relay them to Sandy, whichever is easier.
Okay. Well, I'm okay if there's no questions. I am just happy that you all stuck with me and we're here today. Hopefully this was helpful. You have my contact information at the end. Here in this last slide, I will send these slides right over to Madeline and oh wait, there's one question. Can talk about the role of a consultant hiring role. Let's see. Can I please talk about the role of a consultant hiring role and paying? Let's see. So yeah, consultants can come in to do a couple of things. One is to help craft the questions, help to identify constituents and communities, and then also help in like implementation. And then so that's really kind of how consultants can kind of come in and help with that prioritization. I think also I just wrapped up some work with a client who said, thank you, you helped get us out of our own head and break the narrative that we've been telling ourselves for the past X many years, right? So really being able to come in and tell truth to ourselves is really how I see my role as a consultant. I'm coming in to just help provide some perspective. I don't really I want to come in and help you use information and data to make better decisions. Next question is, speak more about how these processes can be included with the creation of a 3-year strategic plan for an organization. So I like to use these questions in this process really at the beginning to help, what I call it directional, right? To help us provide direction, like as a directional tool. So that, because I feel like sometimes at the beginning of a strategic planning process, there are so many ideas, which is great. We love brainstorming, but being able to take that first step, are we taking a step in the right direction? It's a great idiom for a reason. How do we know we're taking a step in the right direction? And letting our constituents and community like inform that step in the right direction, I think is one of the most like values-based thing that we can do. So great, but thank you. You're welcome. I see some thank yous out there. It's my pleasure. Please feel free to contact me. My contact information is there. I'm more than happy to help. Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sandy, for this amazing program and for sharing these valuable resources and information. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Just a quick reminder, as Sandy mentioned, the recording and the slides with all those resources that Sandy spoke about will be sent to your email following the program. So please keep an eye out for that. Stay safe and healthy out there, everyone. And thank you again, everyone, and Sandy.
Thanks, everyone.